doing this research on business models and supply chains, my motivation to do that in terms of sustainable consumption and production, I would say, is that I do have an interest in consumption, maybe rather than production, based on where I'm coming from. But what is important for me is to take a provision perspective. So in terms of like what is offered to consumers, rather than looking at consumers themselves and the individual responsibility that consumers and citizens have. So really looking at organizations and the role they play in enabling kind of sustainable consumption practices that are then practiced by consumers. And yeah, maybe briefly on my approach to research, which has changed a bit. I used to look more at documents and analyze discourses and framings. But now my research is pretty much action-oriented, which means that I do research, but I also help to implement things and help to change things. And the key thing here is that I co-develop my research approach with people who are practitioners in the food supply chain. So mostly in the context, I'm currently working with a group called the Yorkshire Grain Alliance, which is a group of farmers, bakers, millers, traders, also other researchers and community members who are committed to transforming the food system through a very fundamentally non-conventional approach of producing food and of supplying food to consume. So these people on this alliance support agroecological farming practices, which are following organic principles with integration of some regenerative principles. Not everybody will be aware of the difference of that and what this all means, but we can discuss this a bit later. So using these alternative methods, which are really, which have never been very big in the UK, but are now even in decline. And what they also do is use diverse varieties, so not only one type of wheat, uniformity, and so kind of rejecting this principle, but looking at the land and what can be done using a more gentle and careful methods of choosing the varieties, but also of then processing on a smaller scale with different methods, which goes all the way through the baking, where bakers are just happy to embrace all the different varieties and quantities of flour that come in, and yeah, explore what can be done with it. And their consumers celebrating the inconsistency of the produce because it changes all the time, depending on what's available, and in certain years and seasons there's not so much available. So yeah, I think people will appreciate how this is very different from the conventional supply chain. Yeah, and yeah, so this is what I'm really passionate about, and this is where I see really, where I say like this is activity that can really have the name of sustainable production and consumption. Yeah, I think that's
brilliant. That's really exciting. Thank you, Ulrika. Yeah, and looking forward to discussing some of those interesting topics that you've raised there and getting more into detail on that. And just to remind everybody to put your questions in the Q&A, not in the chat. So thank you for all your questions coming in, and we look forward to addressing those when each speaker has introduced themselves. So do put your questions in while the speakers are talking, so we can get ready to answer them. Thank you very much indeed, Ulrika. So next, I'm really delighted to welcome Mamoudou Akudugu, who's calling in from Ghana. And so thank you very much indeed for joining us, and great if you'd introduce yourself and sustainability in food. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for having me, and good evening to everybody from Ghana. My name is Mamoudou Akudugu, and I'm an associate professor of agricultural economics at the University for Development Studies. sited in the northern part of the country. Is a premier university in the north, which is historically a disadvantage as part of the country with high poverty levels. And so the university was established some 32 years ago with the mandate of working to ensure that the poverty levels are reduced. And so ours is such that we are supposed to work closely with communities to ensure that they are empowered to be able to bring about development and transformation. And so I started off my research career focusing more on the production segment of agricultural value chains because, as you are aware, many parts of Africa, we focus more on the production because we are still struggling seriously with that aspect. And so I continued to work on what needed to be done to bring about increased agricultural production and productivity until sometime about 10 years ago, when I did a paper with some colleagues when I was at the University of Reading in the UK for my PhD. I did a paper, we're looking at the increases in food production and asking the question whether it was attributable to increased productivity or area expansion. And unfortunately, we discovered that the increase in food production was due to area expansion and not productivity gains. And so I began to think about the fact that we needed to do more because you cannot continuously expand your output based on area based on the number of acreage you put under cultivation. And so there was a need to look at how do we transform the systems, agricultural food systems, to bring about productivity across the value chain. So I took interest in agricultural food systems transformation and working to see beyond focusing on inputs and outputs at the farm levels, what other things have to be done across the other segments of the value chain to bring about productivity and bring about transformation and ensure that people have access to the food at affordable prices. And so I've been working on that over the time, and I've published some 2 books on agricultural supply chains in Africa. I've looked at another one on how to use agricultural commodity value chains as a poverty reduction tool for rural farmers, especially in the developing world, and a number of others. And my interest in sustainability lies in the fact that we are increasingly, the populations are increasing, and our lands, agricultural lands, become degraded as a result of bad production methods. And so how do we continue to meet the food demands of the populations with decreasing arable lands, especially in the part of Ghana where we are doing small-scale mining that is destroying a lot of agricultural lands. And so I began to think about the need for sustainability and the need for us to develop systems that are more resilient to the changing trends in the population or demographics, as well as the different changing tastes of the populations. And so that has been my interest. And so we've worked with University of York. We partnered, in fact, to implement the first partnership program, the very first one that went out of the UK. So we implemented that with University of York.
So that's fantastic. We'll thank Mamoudou in a moment, but we'll turn now to Alex. So I'm just really grateful to introduce Dr. Alex Setchfield, who's the Venturing Business Scientist at the Fera Science Limited. Alex, thank you.
No problem at all, and thanks, Sarah, for having me, and thanks to the university too. So yeah, as Sarah says, I'm Alex Setchfield, Venturing Business Scientist at Fera Science Limited. For those of you who don't know, Fera is a company which is only about 5 miles north of York. We're just outside a little village called Sandhutton. It's a very nice rural area to work and live. But I'll sort of rewind a little bit and talk about a little bit about my background and how I got there. So in 2018, I started studying for my PhD, which was based at the University of York. And that was in collaboration with Ferroscience. And that's really how my interest and sort of passion for sustainable, particularly sustainable food production, and particularly protein production. So as many people know here, we've got a rapidly expanding population. By 2050, that's expected to be about 10 billion people. So that's about an additional 2 billion people that will be on the planet in just under 30 years, just over 25 years now, that will all require sources of high quality protein. Now, we as humans typically eat a lot of protein. A lot of that is meat-based at the moment. And despite sort of global trends towards vegetarianism and veganism, consumption of meat and fish is actually rising as a global trend, particularly driven by Southeast Asian countries, which are becoming much more affluent. So we've got to come up with a way of essentially trying to produce protein, animal protein, in a much more sustainable way. So we currently feed livestock, so pigs, chickens, and fish, for example, that we consume as humans, with some really unsustainable protein sources. And I'll come on to those a little bit later, and probably this will come out in the next questions. But we currently feed sort of two major protein sources, soybean meal and fish meal. And for various reasons, they're not sustainable to feed today's population, let alone that growing population moving forward. So my PhD looked at the production of insect larvae as an alternative protein source. Now, you might think, insect larvae, why are we eating insects? Surely they won't taste very nice, but this is for insect larvae production for livestock. So it's a bit of an intermediate, but the ultimate goal is for us as humans to eat those. And so there's a real sector in the world at the moment that is producing insect protein. Companies are out there producing vast amounts of insect protein, but there's a problem of scale. And my PhD project was centered around whether you could repurpose waste from agriculture into a feed for those insect larvae to be developed. So of course, those insect larvae need something to eat themselves. Currently, the sector in industry feeds those insects with food waste, which seems like a great idea, clearing food waste from that humans produce. But under current EU regulation, we can only use food waste that we as humans haven't come into contact with. So that's, for example, not waste that comes from households. And that is really where the majority of the food waste arises at the household. So that limits the scale of production that these companies can produce insect larvae at. So you can only use about 20% of the food waste that the UK produces. So that means that the UK can't be self-sustainable for insect larvae, and the world can't because the regulations aren't moving forward quick enough. So my PhD looked into, can you repurpose in a circular way, moving away from a linear economy, moving into a circular economy, can you repurpose waste coming from agriculture and create sustainable protein sources in larvae? So that's quite a complex thing to do because the plants, the waste that comes from these plants have developed a really complex matrix called lignocellulose. And lignocellulose is in the plant cell wall of these wastes, and it's really difficult to break down. So my PhD looked into using a fungus, and so the enzymes which that fungus secretes can be used to essentially take all the goodness out of the waste, all the sugars that the larvae can access, and enable them to grow. So that really got my interest in sustainable protein production, moving away from non-sustainable protein sources. But my real passion is in translating research outputs from universities into real-world outcomes and real-world impact. So that led to moving into a commercial career at Ferroscience Limited, where I kind of wear a variety of hats at the moment, but one of the hats that I'm particularly sort of passionate about and relevant to this conversation is developing translational PhD research to form real-world impact. So whether that's intellectual property for Ferro to commercialize, or whether it's services that we can provide to government or to commercial clients to help a sector grow, and crucially, to make sure that the companies that are in this space are doing things for the right reasons and making sure that food is safe and quality to eat. So one of Ferro's major sort of drivers is maintaining safety of the food that we produce. So you may have heard of cultivated meat, for example, and cultivated meat is essentially growing meat in the lab. which some people do find a bit scary. And one of FERA's tasks is to prove the safety of those proteins that are coming out of the lab to ensure that we as humans are eating protein that is sustainable and not from non-sustainable sources, but ensuring the safety of those two. So really, I'm driven by my passion for sustainable protein production is really developing that research to make sure that research leaves university and creates impact. And that's my passion, really. So thanks, Sarah.
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed, Alex. And welcome back to Mahmoudou. Sorry we lost you halfway through, Mahmoudou. Would you like to continue?
Yeah, thank you. And my apologies, my network disappointed. Yeah, so I was saying that we worked on a project with the University of York under the first Africa Agri-Food Knowledge-Based Transfer Partnership program, and we worked to produce something that would help achieve 3 things, or should I say 4. The first one is that we wanted to create a market for smallholder farmers to be able to sell their produce. And secondly, to help a local business get to boost its business opportunities. And thirdly, to address a problem of food insecurity and malnutrition among school children in Ghana. So within 15 months, we're able to produce a product we call the cereal, which is fortified with all the micronutrients necessary for growth in children. And so over the period, I have become more interested in sustainability, especially in the food supply chain, because of what I said earlier on about the demographics, the changing populations, and the fact that our agricultural lands are also decreasing rapidly as a result of urbanization and also unconventional extraction of minerals, especially we call galamsey, illegal small-scale mining in Ghana. And so we need to do something that ensure that our food systems are sustainable. And so I've been working in this area over the past 10 to 5 years, working hard to see what is required to be done such that our food systems can continue to meet the changing demands of the growing populations. So in brief, that is what I have to say, and any further conversations, we can have that going forward. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed, Mahmoudou. And actually, you've started to address one of the questions that we've had in here. We'll come to that in a moment. But first, I'm just going to go to Ulrika now. I just want to ask a question that we've had in from Francesca. And Francesca asks, what are your thoughts on the development of perennial crops, for example, through the Land Institute in the US? Ulrika, are you comfortable answering that question?
I don't really know much about that, to be honest.
That's fine, no problem at all. Would anybody else like to pick that up, or shall I make some comments?
Not sure I've got too much to mention, actually, Sarah.
No problem. Mahmoudou, are most of your crops, what do you have many perennial crops that, and what do you think about the potential for that to help with sustainability?
Yeah, in Ghana, we have arable crops, biennial crops, and then perennial crops. And perennial crops are basically the crops that are on the field for more than a year. And so these are crops, coffee, cocoa, and the rest of those crops. Those are the perennial crops. They are basically or mostly cash crops, and their role in terms of the food systems is high because of the fact that they bring, especially from the developing country point of view, they bring a lot of foreign exchange to the country. And you know, Ghana is the second largest producer of cocoa, which is a perennial crop, and that is employing a lot of the population that is working in the agricultural sector. So in effect, perennial crops are a great opportunity and great resource to the economy. And I don't know the kind of crops that US is perennial crops that are being pursued in the US, but if it is what I know as I know in terms of the cocoa, coffee, and the rest of those crops, I mean, it offers great opportunity for sustainability because of the fact that these are more like trees that also bring about carbon sequestration, and so it clearly contributes to climate change resilience, and then provides more carbon stock for reducing the speed of climate change across the world. So perennial crops are good.
Wonderful, thank you, Mamoudou. Fantastic answer, and yeah, really great to point out the increased sequestration of carbon for trees, particularly. Excellent. We've got a question in from James, who's an analyst in DEFRA, and this question I'm going to sort of try and broaden it a bit and ask Alex if you're comfortable with that. So the question is, what's the mood surrounding the move away from European-style CAP subsidy, so Common Agricultural Policy subsidy in sustainable production space? What do you see as the key opportunities and risks here? And I guess we could broaden that a little bit to what do you think of reducing subsidies for animal production? Alex, thank you.
I think I'm being a bit carefully not to be political. So yeah, I think my personal opinion is it's sort of sad to see these European incentives go. And I think so that the risk is that those incentives are not replaced by our own government. But I think that in itself is also an opportunity. So with the rise of things like biodiversity net gain, BNG, and environmental land management schemes, ELMS, there are other things coming online that our government are doing. But at the moment, I would say it doesn't go far enough. And interestingly, some of the work that Ferret does is modelling the impact of things like ELMS and BNG on the farmer's land. So we've done a bit of work with some major estates in the North Yorkshire Moors and in Yorkshire Dales. So working in the sort of regional bioeconomy. And actually, ELMS often don't pay that well farmers. So I think there is a risk here that farmers are not being stimulated to maintain biodiversity as they know they need to, and as they want to, quite frankly. I think farmers often get a bit of a bad rep, but actually they want to change, but it's also a business for them and it needs to make financial sense too. So I think there is a sort of the risk is also an opportunity, if that makes sense. So I think that's what I'd sort of say to that, really.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Alex. Well, I'm going to come to Ulrika next, and if you want to add anything on that, then do go ahead. And I just want to add in a question from Casey, which is related to that about economic incentives. So how can we raise awareness of regenerative farming practices for consumers, and can we create stronger economic incentives for farmers to adopt more sustainable farming practices? Thank you, Ulrika.
Okay, yeah, so those two questions are, I try to link them. Yeah, so I mean, the idea of different subsidies is for farmers to integrate more support for the environment in what they're doing. So there have been a lot of contestations and a lot of anxiety around that, which is often like it can be dismissed on this argument of like, oh, farmers don't want to change. Well, I mean, it's difficult for everyone if you've been doing something all your life to be told like you cannot do this anymore. You have to do something different. But as Alex has said before, lots of farmers want to change. But it's a bit more complex than just saying, okay, you need to change this. First of all, so basically there might be then the incentive to change, but we don't know yet where the journey is going, because like agroecological methods that integrate forestry, for example, so you would have the trees for carbon sequestration, but also grow food at the same time. It's very underexplored. We know it works on a small scale. There are, farms here and there that do it, but it might look very different on a farm just, up the road kind of thing. So it's not only the initial financial incentive to change, but also knowing to have the support to try out things over the years, to work with the land and to do things differently. A bit of a risk here of integrating this and also going towards this idea of regenerative farming is, so regenerative farming is great. It has lots of great principles that it follows, but it's not a certified method. It's not controlled in any way, as opposed to what we have with organic. So basically everybody can say they do regenerative farming based on any criteria that they choose to be important. And what happens a lot with regenerative farming is that people continue having livestock and saying, oh, we need livestock for, protecting the soil, which is an argument that, there is this evidence that livestock can contribute positively to soil health. But we also need to understand that we cannot just say, oh, we just continue having the same, we consume the same amount of meat and just do it regeneratively, because we don't have the land to do this. And again, in terms of emissions, the impact is huge. So that is one drawback and something to be a bit careful with, this integrative methods that where you grow food and you protect the environment at the same time. But in terms of supporting these agroecological methods, which regenerative farming would be one of that. I think what both the government and what business like supermarkets need to understand is that they need to buy into a process rather than a fixed product. And that we're really far off from all this, and there will be lots of trial and error and finding out how things work. So there needs to be financial support in place to support farmers in the transition over years. And then because there is no local infrastructure available for this rather small scale, or in comparison small scale means of production, there needs to be investment for farmers to actually be able to process, store, and transport things on in their area.
I'd like to ask Alex this question, just come in from Francis. And so thank you so much for all your fantastic questions. So Alex, I'd like to ask how can we address the food system and protein challenges, and malnutrition has already been mentioned as well, and balance this with people and communities. So this person is thinking that for low and middle income countries, householders and smallholders have a relationship with livestock, for example, or part of their savings, which is more than just about protein provision. Thanks, Alex.
Yeah, I think it's probably quite useful to talk a little bit about my PhD research and how actually that research project started with the smallholder farmer in mind. So if you think about protein production at the moment, it requires major industry. Soybean meal, for example, we fell huge vast forests in South America, particularly. Fish meal is an industry, a huge industry, but there isn't really protein production at smallholder farmer scale. And one of the hopes with insect protein production is that could be so. So you have smallholder farmers in Ghana, for example, where Mahmoudi comes from. And they are producing a range of agricultural products and also agricultural byproducts and agricultural waste that come from that. And another revenue stream that they could potentially build with that is using those wastes which they currently discard to feed insects, as I've touched on. So that enables smallholder farmers to generate new revenue streams for themselves, from their families and their communities. It also enables them to produce another protein source which they can use and they don't have to buy because they use largely a waste product in sort of a circular economy fashion. And that can't be said with many other protein techniques. So cultivated meat, for example, requires a huge laboratory, It requires a factory to produce at scale, and that's just not feasible for low middle income countries at the moment. So I think there are protein production methodologies that are sustainable, but that also democratize back to the community rather than it being centralized protein production. And that kind of approach is called decentralized production, where you have a number of small location sites that are all serving local communities. And the beauty of insect production is that the rearing of the insects on a waste also generates a waste product in its own right. But that can be used, interestingly, linking back to the last question, as a fertilizer. So there are companies, the waste from insect protein production is called frass. And that is a very, very good NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, organic-based fertilizer, moving us away from chemical fertilizers, which, with the situation in Ukraine, etc., is particularly important given the rise in fertilizer prices across the world. So it has a range of knock-on benefits.
Can I just ask a really basic question though, in that context? I mean, what's wrong with chickens? Don't they eat waste food and then, produce fertilizer? I mean, are insects that much better?
They are. I mean, there's been quite a few studies done on kind of the environmental footprint of production. And one of the benefits you have is that insects can be reared vertically. So we don't have to have large kind of battery type areas or even free range lands that require a low density of chickens, but on low density of chickens on a wide surface area. So we can produce a lot more protein much more efficiently in a much smaller space, whilst also emitting less greenhouse gas.
And so this is really that people are going to eat those insects rather than having chickens eat the insects.
Initially, for chickens to eat the insects, but the holy grail is that we would then eat the insects ourselves as a protein source. Absolutely.
Right, I see. Okay, interesting. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Alex. Really great. Okay, so I'm going to ask. Well, Mahmoudou is back, which is great. So, Mahmoudou, I just want to put that question to you about the impact of climate change on food production and what's being done about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think the impact of climate change on food production is in twofold. There are positives and there are negatives. And so the net effect is what the net impact is what we are looking at. And for those of us in the drier ecologies, very fragile ecologies like Northern Ghana, we have only one rainy season that lasts for about 4-5 months, a whole year. And so the rest of the year, you have no rain. And as I talk to you, our temperatures are above 40 degrees Celsius. And farmers have no opportunity to produce for about 8 months. They basically have to depend on the 4 months of production for the rest of the year. And so the impact of climate change for us is very direct in terms of food production, because the rains these days, two things happen. You can have drought and floods within the same season. The rains come late and do not, you don't have enough rain. And then towards the end of the year, when farmers are supposed to be harvesting, the rains come so heavy that it destroys the food that farmers have produced. In some cases, issues of transport. The foods are produced in the hinterlands, and the rains come so heavy that it carries away all the farm trucks, the roads that are supposed to link to the consumption centers, and the foods that are produced in the hinterlands remain locked up. So you can't get the food out of the farms to the markets. And so these are realities, and these are things that directly affects the lives of people. And so that's why the need for sustainability is very critical, that climate change is having a very high toll on farmers, especially, as I said, African farmers. And so there is the need to think outside the box and see, for example, how do we undertake, for example, water harvesting techniques that allow the farmers to be able to extend their production seasons and also allow for at least improving the microclimate, such that we don't have all these high temperatures, in these fragile ecologies. And so that aside, we know also that there are some crops that have begun to do well because of that the rains coming in late and the rain stopping early or stopping late. And so, but those are, when you look at the net effect, definitely the positives are far less than the negatives. And so it's important that we begin to think about, as I said, sustainability as a way of life. And such that farmers, for us, we may see it as an academic exercise, just wanted to see how is climate change impacting food production and the lives of the people. But for the farmers, it's a matter of survival. And so we need to think through with them and see what is it that beyond the academic exercise, beyond the theories, beyond all the conceptualizations that we do in the intellectual world, in practical terms, how do we translate this into concrete strategies that can make them cope with the changing climate and continue to produce for the growing populations? And this, for me, is something that must be of interest to everybody, because climate change is a global phenomenon with local actions. So whatever actions we act locally, it impacts the globe. And so we must be interested in what happens in areas that have the potential to reduce the impact of climate change and probably reduce the factors that facilitate this climate change from escalating to unmanageable proportions.
Wow. Thank you so much, Mamoudou. That's really sobering and really useful to hear your perspective on the ground. I think I'd just like to broaden one of the questions from one of the participants to ask Ulrika first and then Alex about how we really get change to happen, based on your challenge to us there, Mamoudou, and to all of us. So we've got a question from Sally saying, in the UK, what's the tipping point when the government actively appreciates the connection between healthy agricultural practices to healthy food at a reasonable price for us all to have a healthy diet and healthy workforce? And I just want to sort of broaden that question a bit, if you like, to really say, who has the power to change the food system, to reduce its climate impact, to address climate change? The question sort of implies that the government maybe has the power, or how can we give the government the power to make those decisions, or is it up to the food producers and supermarkets, or is it up to the citizens? So I'm going to come to Ulrika on that first. Thanks, Ulrika.
Thank you. Yeah, who has the power? I mean, so supermarkets and producers would say it's the government. The government would say it's the supermarkets and the producers. All of them would say it's the consumers as well. Just going back a bit to the initial question about integration of health, population health and environmental health. I mean, you've got the answer there. DEFRA is not responsible for health; it's with a different department. And this is where the integration already becomes difficult. I guess there is some acknowledgement in the UK that these things should be looked at in an integrated way. I guess even our project, which is funded by the UKRI, the UK Research and Innovation Fund, specifically to look at food systems, so which means the integration of all these different elements. But I mean, we're struggling with that as well, and so in particular with the work on procurement, working with trying to work with local authorities on that. Also on a local scale, it's two different avenues. The health thing, which is then mostly related to obesity and not even going into the details of micronutrients and so on. And then the environment is something else, and we're talking about land use and so on. Maybe there's responsibilities with academics to just continue raising the awareness of this. I mean, that's anyways what me and my team are trying to do. Where is the tipping point? We would have thought we had enough crises with Brexit and so on that we might have come close to it. We can just all keep pushing for it.
Thank you very much, Ulrike. Alex, do you want to add anything to that, or shall I ask you a different question?
Yeah, I can add a little bit and just say I agree with everything Ulrike just said. But I think just also, I think the role of private investment is really important. So the UK has a wonderful sort of startup ecosystem, and there are all these entrepreneurial scientists developing wonderful solutions and wonderful novel solutions to healthy agricultural practices. But in the cold light of day, those businesses need money. And one of the ways that the UK drives forward the progress of these businesses is by using venture capital and private equity funds to do that. But those investors need to be stimulated to inject private investment into the sector. So part of my role at Ferro is working with that community to de-risk investor investments into businesses that have particularly promising solutions to change agricultural practice. So they need data, and they need convincing, essentially, with data, that the investments they're making are in businesses that will really change the world and that will really be disruptive. Now, you could be slightly cynical and say that they're doing it to line the pockets of the shareholders too, but there is definitely a role in stimulating private investment along with public investment in science to make sure that we really do drive forward the innovative solutions that will change practice for better. And I think that's often missed, really, and it's something that is very, very important. And I think secondly, also, I think farmers have the power, but they themselves need to be empowered. And I think that often, like as Ulrike says, farmers want to change, but they need systems in place and subsidies in place that mean that they are incentivized to change. So I think they have a role to play and are willing to play that role if everyone around them also enables them.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Alex. And before we come to each panel member for final comments, I just want to ask Mamoudou one final question. So I'd like to know, Mamoudou, who you think has the power to address climate change. But also, I just wanted you to give us a bit of perspective on a question from James here about global supply chains, asking, there's a sort of often people think that transport is a big problem, and so we should reduce buying food from overseas. And I'm curious your thoughts on whether in the UK, for example, we should reduce the amount of food we're buying from Africa, or whether it's actually perfectly sustainable bringing that by boat, and we actually need to support communities in different countries as well as the UK.
All right, thank you again, Sarah, for this. I think that the question of who has the power to address climate change, for me, is that we all do have the power to address climate change. There are different levels by which we can do our part to ensure that the climate change menace is reduced. The danger is to think that the solution is outside us. And so we can continue to live our life as usual, or as business as usual, and then expect that somebody somewhere has the power to change the problems and the challenges and the difficulties that we are going through. And so for me, it is to address climate change, it requires everybody to play their role. It's like that as a farmer, you must not do things that lead to facilitating the climate change menace. For example, we must not clear the farms. In Ghana, a typical farm, when you go, they cut down the trees and to plant the maize or the corn. So is this a practice that is sustainable? The answer is no. Can the farmer produce the corn without cutting the tree? The answer is yes. So can the farmer also take that role of not cutting down the trees and planting the maize? Can the political leader who has the power to come out with policies that will ensure that these trees or actions that facilitate adaptation and coping, mitigation of climate change are passed? Are they ready to do their part? Yes. If they are ready to do their part, let them do their part. So it's across the whole chain that each actor along the chain must do their part, such that we'll be able to address this issue. The issue of importing food, whether, for example, developed countries like UK should reduce the food imports from places like Africa and all that. I do not think that the solution lies in a reduction in food imports from Africa.
Mm-hmm.
The solution is partnership.
Mm-hmm.
And that partnership, there must be equity in that partnership. If, in fact, DR Congo alone, the fertile lands in DR Congo alone, the Democratic Republic of Congo, is enough to feed the world if we put it into good use.
Wow.
How we work together to explore the huge potentials in these areas without necessarily disadvantaging anybody? Can we be more equity sensitive and ensure that at least this place, Ghana has a competitive advantage in producing cocoa? Can we support them to produce the cocoa to the best of their ability so that they can supply the other parts of the world that do not have this competitive advantage? There are things that we don't produce. We don't have the equipment. We don't have the state-of-the-art technologies for agricultural production. Can we get that from the UK to produce at optimal levels in Ghana? I think that is how the conversation should be, rather than saying that somebody should cut back and somebody should bring the solution. The solution is in our hands, and we all must
Thank you,
do our
Mamoudou.
part. Thank you.
That's a brilliant answer, and sorry for giving you two massive questions just before the end there. So thank you ever so much. And I just want to turn now, finally, I just want to ask Alex and then Ulrika to say their final words, and then we'll wrap up very quickly. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, I think thanks, Sarah. I think just picking up on what Mamoudou was saying there around kind of working together. Funny enough, that's what I've got in my kind of notes here in terms of from the research side. What I find so fascinating in this area is the fact that it's so interdisciplinary, and it requires natural scientists to work with social scientists, to work with policy, to work with investment communities and farmers. And as sort of touching on what Moody's saying is that there's all these actors in the chain that all need to work together. And I think having panels like this stimulates that. So it's brilliant.
Thank you very much, Alex. Very good. Ulrika, final comment.
Yeah, I think there. I can just agree with what the other two panelists said.
Brilliant. So it's all in our hands, and we need to work together. That's fantastic. Well, thank you very much indeed to everybody for joining on behalf of us as a panel. We're really grateful for you for coming this evening and your fantastic questions. Thank you for providing us this opportunity to share our perspectives as part of the university's Sustainability Week events. Over to you, Kyla.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Sarah, for chairing that so expertly, despite our technical hitches. I really appreciate all the panel's time and efforts that you've put into this. if you are willing to be part of the change, if you are firmly convinced, as I am, by Mamoudou's inspiring words that the power is in our hands, then please do join our sustainability network. It's open to absolutely everybody. Anyone who has an interest in this area, we want your support in this area, your insights, your ideas, your thoughts. We'll be forwarding you details of that in the follow-up email that will come out after this event. You'll be getting that in the next few days. Please do look out for it and join that network. I think we should leave with Mamoudou's excellent words of the power is in your hands. Thank you, everybody. Good night.